This year, Israel might strike Iran.
Iran appears to be stepping up its nuclear enrichment program.
Tonight, a top Pentagon official testifying that Iran could now make enough nuclear material for a bomb.
It is no secret that we have become a nuclear threshold state, and this is a reality.
Only thing that has credibly stopped rogue nations from developing nuclear weapons is a credible military threat or a credible military action.
Israel has been threatening to strike Iran for years, but for a number of reasons. This year, the threat feels far more real.
And that's because Iran has never been this close to a bomb. Recently, traces of 90% uranium were found at Fordo, one of the key Iranian nuclear facilities, built deep within the mountains near the city of Qom.
This is close to the level of purity needed to produce a bomb.
US officials have assessed that Iran was 2 weeks away from having enough enriched uranium for a bomb. The US and Iran have been trying to revive the nuclear deal, which limits Iran's ability to produce a bomb and was meant to avoid the kind of escalation an Israeli strike would trigger. But the talks have been deadlocked for months.
Mr. Biden, would you please announce that JCPOA is dead? Can you just announce that? No, why not?
Iran's military support for Russia and crackdown on domestic protests made it even more difficult to re-enter the deal President Trump left in 2018.
There are some negotiations to try and find a solution to the crisis, including some talks that focus on the most concerning parts of Iran's nuclear program. But for now, there's really no guarantee that these talks are going to succeed or that they'll succeed fast enough to avoid an escalation.
It doesn't help that Iran appears to be playing a game of cat and mouse with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN watchdog that's supposed to keep tabs on the Iranian nuclear program.
It's really important to understand that the traces of close to military-grade uranium that were found at Fordo were found during a surprise visit of the UN inspectors. And that raises a whole lot of red flags when it comes to Iran's intentions and what we know about Iran's nuclear program.
Even before that, a visit of the IAEA had also detected changes to the setup of the centrifuges producing uranium, a change that Iran had not previously announced.
This makes an already dangerous situation even more explosive.
We have to remember that although the US left the Iran nuclear deal under President Trump, these inspections still give us a good picture of where the Iranian program stands, how close Iran may be to a bomb, and whether it took a decision to build one. This is very important because of how close Iran is to a bomb.
Making sure the UN is capable of detecting an Iranian decision to produce a bomb is really critical when it comes to mitigating the chances of miscalculation, including an Israeli strikes against Iran.
We're in a gray area where Iran is close enough to a bomb that it could suddenly decide to race to produce one, and produce one even before the UN watchdog catches them.
That's why the game of cat and mouse that Iran is playing with the UN inspectors raises a major red flag.
It creates uncertainty, and uncertainty carries with it the risk of miscalculation. This is an extremely risky situation, particularly as Israel is actively preparing for a possible strike. Israel carried out joint maneuvers simulating a strike with the US. But the recent Pentagon leaks also showed that Israel was preparing to act on its own, even without the US. According to one of those leaks, in February, Israel rehearsed its own version of a strike. The document says the CIA does not know Israel's near-term plans and intentions. And this is coming from Israel's closest ally.
But what would an Israeli strike against Iran actually look like? Let's take a deeper look.
Visual contact with you.
که کوچکترین خطایی از جانب آنها نسبت به امنیت جمهوری اسلامی ایران.
If you ask average Israelis what they think a strike on Iran would look like, they'd probably tell you this, that they'd wake up one morning to find that Israel has struck and destroyed the Iranian nuclear program under the cover of night.
Of course, this isn't how an Israeli strike against Iran would actually look like. But this perception that a strike would be quick and painless really comes from history.
For its short history, Israel has destroyed two nascent nuclear programs. The Iraqi nuclear reactor, called Ozark, in 1981 during Operation Opera, and the Syrian nuclear reactor in the eastern city of Deir ez-Zor in 2007. In both cases, the two countries failed to respond to the Israeli attack. Iraq was in the midst of an extremely bloody war with Iran and couldn't really afford to respond. And when it comes to Syria, Israel made sure to keep the strike quiet so as not to embarrass Assad and force a response.
And it worked. Assad never acknowledged that Syria had a nuclear program to begin with, which meant that he didn't have to retaliate either.
These were extremely complex operations, but they were pretty simple when you compare it to the kind of strike Israel would have to carry out against Iran. First, Israel would not benefit from the element of surprise. In both cases, Israel was able to maintain a very high level of secrecy, but that wouldn't be the case with Iran. In fact, Iran has had decades to prepare for an attack. The second element, and perhaps the most important one, the Iranian program is far more advanced than its Iraqi or Syrian counterparts.
Both of those strikes targeted one single facility.
Here, when we're talking about Iran, if Israel truly wants to wipe out the program or just set it back significantly, it will have to strike multiple heavily protected sites. I mean, there are reports that Israel has identified as many as 3,000 targets to strike inside Iran. This makes a strike extremely complex because the sites are spread out across Iran, and because of the distance Israeli planes would have to cross to even reach the border with Iran. I mean, we're talking about crossing at least 1,000 kilometers of hostile territory, or more if Israel chooses to go through friendlier countries just to get to the border with Iran.
If you've watched Top Gun 2, just know that this isn't it.
An Israeli strike would not involve just a few concealed aircraft, but probably more than 100, alongside refuelers, drones, probably some search and rescue team in case planes are shot down, and even ground troops. The most challenging target that Israel will have to strike is the fuel enrichment site at Fordo, which is one of the most recently built sites and was created in part for the purpose of defending against Israeli attacks. Depending on who you ask, it's estimated that the Fordo site is built between 50 to 90 meters underground, deep within the mountains. There's been an ongoing debate about whether Israeli airplanes truly have the ability to hit Fordo. Israel's most potent bunker buster, that we know at least, is the GBU-28, which is a US-made bunker buster, but it is believed to only be able to pierce through around 6 meters of concrete and around 30 meters of earth.
A 2011 assessment suggests that Israel would need 70 of these powerful bombs to dig deep enough to get to the nuclear facilities.
Now, this assessment was conducted a decade ago, and Israel has worked since to facilitate a strike. But this gives us an idea of what a strike on Iran's nuclear program would look like. And it really rules out the Top Gun scenario. You know, 2 bombs dropped on a single target just won't do the job. Not to mention that these bombs are extremely heavy, 5,000 pounds or more than 2 tons just for the GBU-28. Israel's main aircraft capable of carrying it, the F-15I, is likely to only be able to carry 1 bomb. That means that if it takes 70 bunker busters to get to Fordo, it would take at least 70 aircraft to carry out this operation. There is a newer version of this bunker buster called the MOP, or Massive Ordnance Penetrator, which is the most advanced bunker buster the US ever produced. We know that it has effectively been tested in the American Southwest against a possible replica of Fordo a decade ago. The problem? Well, first, Israel doesn't have it. The US has so far no plan to transfer it. I think it's clear that the reason for this is that it gives Washington some amount of control over whether Israel can carry out a unilateral strike. And even if Israel was to somehow acquire it, this is a bomb so heavy that the Jewish state doesn't have a plane capable of carrying it. Now, there are potential outside-of-the-box alternatives that Israel likely considered. One of them would be to actually send ground forces inside the compound, but this is obviously an extremely risky operation. The other would be to seal off the compound's main tunnels, the entrances to Fordo, which could be done relatively easily.
But this is unlikely to delay the Iranian nuclear program for more than a few months.
And that's obviously not the only challenge to a strike. One of the other main challenges is the need to cross thousands of kilometers over potentially hostile countries like Iraq or Syria that could actually warn Iran of the upcoming strike. And I mean, Iran is actually trying to make sure that they do, because Tehran has been recently trying to deploy more air defenses and radars in Syria, for instance. But beyond that, this also means that Israeli planes will have to refuel to maximize their ability to strike Iranian facilities and not have to go back to their home bases thousands of kilometers away. There are two problems with that. The first is that refuelers aren't as easy to hide as other combat aircraft. The second problem is that Israel is still waiting to get some of the newest refuelers from the US, which would make a strike far more effective. And again, we see here Washington is trying to use the tools that it has to make sure Israel cannot unilaterally strike Iran. Now, I'm not saying this makes the strike impossible, and Israel has been looking at potential solutions, including by bringing civilian airliners that are turned into refuelers, or by mastering a technique called the buddy refueling technique between two combat aircraft. But this also means that the term strike here, I think, is quite deceptive when you realize what this really is. You wouldn't wake up to the news that Israel has bombed Iran. You would wake up to the news that Israel is actively bombing nuclear sites. This campaign would require hundreds of sorties and thousands of airstrikes, and probably last for days at least, if not weeks.
But don't be mistaken, this won't be a strike, it will be a war.
A first wave of strikes would have to first destroy Iranian air defenses, probably using some of Israel's most advanced stealth aircraft, the F-35. Now, there are rumors that Israel already tested Iranian defenses by flying the F-35 over Iran. It's very possible also that Israel will use ballistic missiles and drones to hit air bases and air defenses in Iran, and also to overwhelm Iranian air defenses. This could take several hours, but most likely it is going to take several days. I mean, Iran has been investing heavily in both homemade air defenses and Russian-made systems. Then would come a second wave with Israel's fourth-generation fighter jets carrying the bunker busters that we spoke about and the heavy payloads required to actually destroy the main nuclear target. Several rounds of these strikes would be needed to destroy all of the various targets.
But by the time the first airplanes are making their way back to Israel, their home bases may already be the target of Iranian missile attacks.
Mostly the Lebanon-based Hezbollah. Hezbollah is believed to have more than 100,000 missiles and will be able to fire at least several thousand missiles per day at Israel. Now, most of the rockets and missiles Hezbollah has in its arsenal are unguided, but the group has also been trying to expand its precision-guided missiles, meaning missiles that can actually accurately hit specific targets, and they would be used against a series of Israeli airbase.
I mean, that's the whole reason why Iran has been investing so heavily into Hezbollah's missile arsenal.
Israel has some of the best air defenses in the world, including the battle-proven Iron Dome, but it's not clear that the country will be able to maintain the very high level of interception rates we've seen in the past when faced with this amount of missiles.
To give you a point of comparison, during the 2021 Gaza war, Hamas was able to fire more than 4,000 missiles during an 11-day conflict. Hezbollah would be able to fire the same amount of missile, but in just 2 to 3 days.
It will be a deadly conflict, and one that may drag the Israeli army into a multi-front war, as Iran may also mobilize proxies in Syria, and as the Israeli army will probably have to prepare to enter Lebanon to stop the rocket fire. But that's not all. Iran will also look to exact a price on Israel's allies. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards have been preparing to close one of the world's main naval choke points, the Persian Gulf. The IRGC, the guards, would use coastal missile cities and a fleet of fast attack boats and naval mines to disrupt maritime traffic in one of the busiest areas in the world, and a vital artery when it comes to the export of oil and gas. This will ripple through the world's economy. Iran will also launch a set of attacks against US interests in the region, and even possibly US allies like Gulf countries such as Saudi Arabia or the UAE. I mean, the recent Iran-Saudi deal may decrease that chance, but it's very likely that Iran will try to exact a price on the US and its allies in the region. In 2012, the last time Israel was this close to striking Iran, Washington was forced to deploy several key military assets, including an aircraft carrier group, to the region, for fear that a unilateral strike by Israel would trigger this kind of Iranian response against US bases in the region. And we've seen what Iran was capable of in 2020 in the aftermath of the killing of the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani in Iraq.
From what I just described, you can guess that for Israel, a strike against Iran's nuclear program is really the last resort option. I mean, Israel can go for something more limited, but it's really not clear that Iran will respond in a more limited manner.
If a decision is taken in Israel that a strike against the Iranian nuclear program is needed, Israel will be looking to convince the US, because the US military has a better chance of crippling the Iranian nuclear program, and because any kind of attack against the Iranian program would probably backfire on the US anyway. This means that an Israeli strike against Iran isn't necessarily viewed as a good option, but the chance of an attack are really at the highest they've been in years. And if either Iran or Israel miscalculate, or if Iran suddenly decides to race toward a bomb, this last resort option may become the only option Israel feels it has to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear state.
Thank you for watching. I hope it made for an interesting watch. And apparently I need to tell you to like and subscribe. I guess that makes me a YouTuber now.